So we should get started. I'm Sherry Katz-Barnard. I'm your reunion chair. I really want to thank Professor Mary Gordon for gracing us with her presence. The last time I saw her in person, in the flesh, as it were, I snuck into Elizabeth Hart. I told her this story just before when I saw her. I snuck into Elizabeth Hardwick's class where she was, my friend Arlene Pack, who was 2 years ahead of us, was in Elizabeth Hardwick's class with Mary, and she was writing poetry at the time, and Elizabeth Hardwick told her that she should write prose instead of poetry. And I loved her writing that. But I used to sneak into Professor Hardwick's class because I was never a writer. But I loved listening to writing. Loved listening to people who could write. And Tony Coffey, who was my editor, who's here. I'm so glad you asked to come. I'm so happy to have you here. I decided to try to be class correspondent for our class for a couple of years or a couple of times. Tony saved my bacon more than once because I am not a writer. Although I tried to be. So here is a waiver that I have to read. As a quick reminder for those of you on Zoom, this online event enables an attendee to participate through a personal device's microphone and/or camera. An attendee may elect not to participate through the use of a microphone and/or camera. The election of an attendee to use a microphone and/or camera constitutes a release and waiver of rights. We should all do it at the same time. Waiver of rights in the capture of the attendee's image, likeness, and/or voice for the exclusive use by Barnard College. I thank you. So, in my knowing what I'm good at and what I'm not good at, I have asked our wonderful Linda Weinstein Barnas to please come up and conduct this session. And I would like to introduce Linda. After graduating from Barnard with an English literature major and a minor in Columbia Daily Spectator, Linda headed to Columbia Journalism, where she earned her master's degree. In 1974, she went to work as a reporter for the Patterson News, where she covered everything from local government to crime to the occasional celebrity. She joined the Associated Press in 1978, starting in Columbus, Ohio, and then joined the national desk in New York City. After marrying Michael Barnas in 1988 and moving to Albany, she worked for the Schenectady Gazette as a news and features reporter. When her daughter was born in 1991, she changed direction, as most of us do, staying home and then earning a master's degree in elementary education. She began teaching at her local synagogue, where she remains to this day. And she said, after wrangling sixth graders in Hebrew school, how hard could anything else be?
Make it fun or you'll be the fun. Any teacher. That was taught to me by a seventh grade math teacher at one of the Albany's urban schools.
Oh, wow.
Tough crowd.
So I am turning over the mic to these wonderful ladies. Wonderful book, and thank you.
They say that those who can do and those who can't teach. Well, Professor Gordon, Dr. Gordon, defies that by both doing and teaching. She's retired from Barnard 3 years ago as professor, and she also is the author of 10 novels, 6 works of nonfiction, including memoirs, Circling My Mother and The Shadow Man, and 3 collections of short fiction, including the stories of Mary Gordon, which was awarded the Story Prize. And she lives in New York City and in Wisconsin, and I think you said Rhode Island. So she's well-traveled. And so we have, and today it's kind of like how many of you are in book clubs? It's been a big thing. So you know, kind of, know the drill, one person leads and then the discussion takes off. And it's a little, in fact, I'm in 2 book clubs, and we are going to, and I'm doing our next book club at the Fort Orange Club Literary Society, and we are going to do your book. So I'm double dipping. But so you guys know, general format, so we'll follow that. But the Violinist Wife is a little different. It's not quite short stories. It's not, but it's like 4 novellas really that are self-contained, but they have some commonalities. And we'll talk about that, and I'm sure it occurred to you as you were reading the stories, but as you were reading the novellas. But wanted to ask first, what inspired you to write, and the connections between the stories, and how you group them? Yeah.
Okay, here's my tail. It's on. It's on. Can you hear me? No.
Yeah, you have to press the button and it'll turn green.
It is green. Speak closer. Hold it close to your mouth.
How's this? Okay. So what I was thinking about, partly, one has dialogues with students all the time, but it occurred to me that for our cohort, Europe was the great desirable imaginary. And so when I was at Barnard, I saved up for 3 years. I saved $500 so I could go to Europe with a backpack on my back. And at that time, Europe on $5 a day, $5 was expensive. But Europe was the place. That was where real people lived. That was where people knew how to dress and eat and have sex. And it was, and for me, and I've thought about this a lot, about literature, because I'm female and because I was both Jewish and Catholic, I never felt American. And in terms of American literature, which was so male, so Protestant, and so ex-urban, that had nothing for me. And all my literary models were European. Because if you look, for example, at 19th century American literature, there is no major heroine except Hester Prynne. So women are really markedly absent from American literature. And if you look at films after the 30s, women were either sex objects or murderesses. And so I felt that everything I needed to know to become the person I wanted to be was in Europe. And then when you get to Europe, you realize that you're American.
Oh, yeah.
Because go to Italy, which is my heart's home, and you say, I'll meet you at 2, and they mean anytime between 2 and 7. And all kinds of things like that, where you realize you're American. Also, my first trip to Europe was in 1971, and the Vietnam War was on it. And all I kept doing was apologizing for being American. I'm sorry. I don't like the war. I'm sorry. So Europe was very much a center of imagination for me. And so I wanted to write about Americans and their relationship to Europe, and then Europeans and their relationship to America. And I really like the novella form, which is unfortunately not that easy to publish in, because for me, a short story is more like a poem. You have a sort of central image or event and everything radiates from that. For me, a novel, you have to create a world. And so something that's in between those two is the novella form, which I like very much. So that's kind of how I got there. And I was, as always, I have been quite obsessed by Simone Weil, who is a very vexing and difficult character. And a lot of people really were, there's so much that I admire about, there's a very funny story. My husband took a picture of me on the beach in Cape Cod, and I'm on the beach, I'm in a bathing suit, the sun is shining, the sand is white, the ocean is blue, and I'm reading the collected works of Simone Weil. And my husband took a picture and said, "This is a crazy person that I'm married to." And what I was very upset, because what I admire about her is her devotion to the poor and the suffering, and her imagination of never, so for her, evil is making an object of a person. And that's the source of evil for her. Also, she writes beautifully about the virtue of attention. So for her to pay attention, to attend to something carefully, is one of the great human enterprises. So there was a lot, I was very, very drawn to her, but she was, like my father, a self-hating Jew. Yeah. And she wrote horrible things about the Jews as her people were being exterminated. So, you know, I couldn't just sign on for that. And so what it created for me was a kind of template for what do you do if somebody whom you partly admire also has parts that are hideous. And it comes up a lot in cancel culture, which is, so if you look at Dostoevsky, he's a foot-stomping anti-Semite. If you look at Joyce, he's a tremendous sexist. If you look at Flaubert, tremendous sexist. And so at Flannery O'Connor, foot-stomping racist. And so what I tried to do in teaching was to say, okay, we have to witness this contradiction. It's much more painful to say somebody whom I partly admire is also partly hideous. How do you live with that? Instead of saying nobody can read the Brothers Karamazov. And so I find that a very anguishing situation to be in. So I wanted to write about, and I was also very interested in mentoring, you know, how you can be formed by a teacher who so anyway, I created this character of Geneviève to be Simone Weil's student. And I was also fascinated that Simone Weil lived just up the road on Riverside Drive for a little while. So that's how that came. And then my husband was from the Midwest, and our Midwesterner. And he talked a lot about the innocence, and he was a lot older than I was. He talked a lot about the innocence of what you didn't know in the Midwest, what you didn't know was going on, and how shocking that was as the war came closer. And then I was reading about Thomas Mann, and Thomas Mann came to America. He was quite heroic during the war. He escaped to America, and he went around America to high schools and to Rotary clubs and all kinds of things, saying, look, this is going on in Germany, pay attention. So those two things came together. I thought, what would it be like if my husband had met Thomas Mann? And that's where that came from. And the other two, I love Ireland. And again, it was how un-American can you be in a foreign country? And what's the point at which you say, I'm an American? So that's kind of where that came from. And the last one was just, I had a friend who still lives in Lucca, and I loved this Italian artist, Matteo Civitale. So then I wanted to write something about him, and then I actually did go to that kind of exhibit where this guy was doing a sort of punk version of this artist whom I loved, and it upset me very deeply. Anyway, that was a long answer.
That was wonderful. That was wonderful. And it's interesting, we were talking about this just now, but in the last story, where she takes the paint and throws it on the artwork, and it kind of prefaces stuff that happened in New York, of course, at the Brooklyn Museum.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of interesting to see how provocative art can be. And
Well, after I wrote this, but before I published it, I swear I'm not making this up, somebody did that to that exhibit.
really, art imitating art, imitating art. But now, getting more specific into your background a little bit, since this is a Barnard reunion, what influence did Barnard have on you both as an undergraduate and then, of course, now as a professor? Like, and who were your mentors? Who were the people that besides Elizabeth Hartwick, who are the people who influenced you? I know we all have the people who influenced us. In my case, Professor Ulanov and Professor Keurig. Other people can talk about Dr. Klass and anthropology. So we all have people that we really stood out for us. So who are yours?
Barnard saved my life. That's all. And I feel like I can never repay Barnard. I went to a terrible, terrible high school. It was really bad. So my father was Jewish, although he converted, but I was raised Catholic. And I went to an unbelievably bad Catholic school. And I don't know how, I do know how. I read J.D. Salinger, and I mainly read The Glass Family. And I wanted to, if not be, then meet the Glass family. And I knew that I couldn't do that if I went to Catholic college. And Seymour Glass had gone to Columbia. Now, I didn't know my mother hadn't gone to college. My father had died. Nobody I knew had gone to college. Our guidance class, they had people from nursing school, people from beautician school, people from business school, and I wanted to get to Barnard. It was like a heat-seeking missile. And the principal wasn't going to send my transcripts because they didn't want us going to non-Catholic schools. And what I always say is, if I had the energy, perhaps this is stupidity, that I had when I was 17, I could rebuild the World Trade Center single-handedly. But I called the Barnard admissions office and I said, they're not sending my record. Call them up and make them do it. They did. And two of my other friends came with me. And I walked through these gates and I thought, I'm in heaven. I'm just in heaven, because I met all these other smart people. And I was taken very, very good care of by the English department. So Jan Thaddeus was my first writing teacher. I then babysat for her kids. Her son, who is now a math professor at Columbia, is coming up to my house this weekend. So she really helped me. Ann Prescott was my first year teacher, and she was incredible to me. And David Robertson, who I had for Victorian, and I had him for the required literary criticism. He taught me how to read. And it was all these upper class wasps who were taking me seriously. I mean, I couldn't believe it. And I always felt like, oh my God, I'm gonna pick up the wrong fork and they're gonna find out that I'm a barbarian. But they were so nurturing to me. And I had to work every summer of my life till I was 15. And when Jan Thaddeus found that out, she got me a grant from the Alumni Association or something. And I took Italian at Harvard with the money. And it was the first time I ever didn't have to work for the summer. So I was so well taken care of at Barnard. Then when Ann Prescott became chair of the English department, she hired me. And she said, I saved your midterms. And then Elizabeth Hardwick, who was a difficult mentor, she was exciting, but narcissistic in her mentoring, which is one has to watch out for. But she was thrilling, and she never helped me. She made a point of not helping her students, but she helped me stylistically. So I will never, ever be able to repay Barnard for what it did.
Now, what makes the four, now getting more specific to the stories, unless there's anything else you want to add about your life. I think my battery or something just died here. Getting more specific to this. We're flashing. Okay. It's flashing. I don't know. Does that mean anything? You're good now. Okay. There. Getting more specific to the stories. What links the four? Why did you group them together?
Because I wanted to talk about the relationship of America and Europe.
Yeah.
What it was in the American imagination, how the phenomenon of Europe fed the American imagination, how it created what we knew to be American and how we knew ourselves as not American. And then, of course, with the war, then the relationship kind of shifted. So suddenly America became desirable to Europeans in a way that it never had been before. It became, although, it's not that our record was that great. It wasn't. I mean, the number of Jews that we didn't take in, we'll never be able to atone for. But instead of just being written off as this, riffraff that want to dilute culture, America suddenly became a place of refuge and a desirable place for Europeans. And then, as in the case of the Thomas Mann novella, suddenly Americans had to think about Europe in a new way. So that was.
Yeah. Now, each of the novellas does spin around a reappraisal of, a revered person. The liar and the liar's wife, Simone Weil, Thomas Mann, and then the lover in the fourth novella. I guess what do you think of human behavior? What does that tell you? What were you trying to depict about human behavior in
It never
that?
occurred to me before you said that. So thank you.
And thanks, Sherry. We we all brainstormed on this.
That never occurred to me that unified them, but it's absolutely right. I guess I think that when you're young, you try to figure out who you are by looking at somebody that you admire or would sort of like to be. And sometimes that works, or sometimes it's the necessary and only first step. But then sometimes a part of maturity is having to say, maybe not the way I thought.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've all had that in our lives. Did that occur with you in your personal relationships, particularly? I know about your father a little bit.
Well, it occurred with Elizabeth Hardwick,
Yeah.
who, as I became more successful, she became more undermining. And I had to actually split off from her because she's quite cruel after a while. And after a while, I just remember my husband saying, you shouldn't let anybody talk to you like that. And that was very hard because I thought she had the right to talk to me any way she wanted. And there was a certain point where I thought, no, this is a danger to me. And I actually, I did say goodbye to her before she died, which I was happy that I did. But her mentorship, which had been very nourishing, then turned out to be actually dangerous. And I think what I've learned, or what I try to think about is mentoring, is it's not about you. It's really about the person that you're mentoring, and to try to get your narcissism out of it. And so if they're going in a way that was not your plan for them, it's actually their life and not yours. And sometimes that's not quite so easy.
Yeah, the ability to lie, of course, has become a big part of political culture.
Yeah.
How do you relate the liar and his charm and the ability to seduction and lying, I guess, is the link?
Well, I don't think that my character was like Trump.
Was I referring to any? Perish the thought.
So it is something that Irish people do. Freud said the Irish were not analyzable. Because he said they basically they can't tell a straight story. And it's part of their charm and their magic. And sometimes it's wonderful. And I think if you're Irish and you're used to it, you can kind of pick up the code. But when you're American, it makes you realize how American you are, because you kind of want people to tell it like it is, and you're a little bit shocked when they don't. But my daughter, my daughter accuses me of not being able to tell a story straight. So yeah, I was telling a story, and this sounds, it doesn't make me look good, but I'll tell it anyway. For example, of why my daughter gets mad at me. So we had we still have a blind couple that lived across the hall from us on Claremont Avenue. And they had a guide dog that was like a C- guide dog. It was not a good guide dog. And it was summer, and the door to my apartment was open because, as you know, these kids ran in and out all the time. And the dog led the blind person into my apartment thinking that they were going out to the street. And I had to say, I'm really sorry, but, and so I was telling the story, and then I added the line, it was fine until he tried to hail a cab in the living room. And Anna said, that didn't happen, Mom. That never happened. The story was perfectly fine. Nobody tried to hail a cab in the living room. And I said, I'm a fiction writer, you know. So I kind of do have that thing. And for my daughter, who's, you know, so ethical, you could smack her. She doesn't like that in me. And I think, oh, well, it kind of makes life fun, and, you know, everybody laughed. And so I think there's lying and lying. So for example, if somebody comes back from the beauty parlor and they just got a terrible haircut.
Oh, yeah.
They say, what do you think of my haircut? You say, it's great. Because they can't grow it in a minute. It's going to take a couple of
Put by
months.
a wig.
You know, do I look fat in that? No. So
my mother always said, in like at Loman's dressing room, if somebody asks you how it looks, before they buy it, you can tell them, well, maybe that color isn't right for you or something. But once they bought it, you have to.
Once you
you
get
have
the
to-
haircut, why make them feel miserable for 2 months? So there's lying and lying. And storytelling is a form of lying. So I was very interested in when is a lie enriching
Mm.
and when is a lie either destructive or untenable.
Yeah, getting into the second story and the third story to some degree, but the role of religion and in Western culture, and it certainly with Simone Weil, and also even with Thomas Mann and some of his works, and this idea of a Western culture that doesn't necessarily include minorities.
Yeah.
How did how did you experience that, and being from both and having a father who tried to, who rejected his differences?
Yes, although he never denied being Jewish.
Yeah.
So I was like, I always tell my friends that I have probably experienced more anti-Semitism than anybody I know, because my working class Irish and Italian family were incredibly anti-Semitic. And everything that I did that they didn't like, they would say, and I could hear this phrase, that's the Jew in you. And particularly being smart and reading books. I was like, oh, you think you're better than we do? Well, yes, actually I do.
My husband could identify with that.
And so I heard and I knew, and it was attached to me, how pervasive and poisonous it was. I knew it in my bones from a very early age. But then one of the things that has happened to me, particularly in the literary and academic world, is because I'm Catholic, people that I do not even know walk up to me and say, how can you be Catholic? How can you believe in all that stuff? What about the pedophilia? And I'm like, hello, have we met? And so I feel like I have gotten richness from both traditions, which is very important to me. My grandson is about to have his bar mitzvah, so my grandchildren are being raised Jewish, and everybody says, aren't you upset? And I say, no, I'm thrilled. But I am a person of faith. I feel like the experience of prayer has always been very linked to the experience of writing for me. I am a very left-wing Catholic. I think most of the official Catholicism that's practiced is quite hideous, but then there are people like this Pope that I think is probably the most moral voice in the world, and people like Oscar Romero, who was martyred for left wing, and people like Daniel Berrigan. So, and the same thing with Judaism. And people feel like they can, if they don't approve of the latest thing that Israel has done, can say, well, that's Jews. So it's a lot of people, a lot of history. It's always much more complicated than people want to. And I feel like that's my job as a writer, to say it's much more complicated than you think.
Yeah. Now, how do you feel about taking people who are known historically, who people? You can Google Thomas Mann and find out that Death in Venice was kind of where his psyche was really at, despite his wife and all that. Simon Weil and her asceticism to the nth degree that was very, very difficult for people in her. How do you protect those people and portray them in your fiction?
Well, I think the way I did it was I tried to have the historical character filtered through the consciousness of somebody whom I had invented.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't like I was making them the narrator or even the center of it. It was a filtered observation. That's how I did it.
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting technique, I think. Writing in the, I guess, the third person.
Yeah.
Okay. What's different about writing memoirs? How do you do memoirs?
You have to tell the truth.
Yeah.
I'm very strict about that. People who kind of fudge their memoirs, I'm extremely judgmental about that. And the thing about writing a memoir is you have to keep interrogating yourself. Did that really happen? Is that something I made up? Is it something I remember from a picture? So it's not like you can ever say, I know this is the truth. Again, it's filtered through consciousness. And I felt like in writing memoirs, I had to constantly be interrogating myself in that way. Did this happen or did I make it up? Did I just want it to happen? But I did feel like as best as I could, I tried not to make stuff up. And I did do a lot of research. And in my father's case, I found out stuff that I never knew and never really wanted to know. And I had to be honest about that.
Do you keep diaries? Do you keep
do.
journals
I
and
do.
stuff? So you can go back and at least look at your
I
reaction.
never look at them again.
Really?
I don't know why. Occasionally I look and say, oh, who was that I'm writing about? You know, and who was I? And it's more kind of a way of just understanding at the moment what I'm doing, and maybe somebody will. They won't be able to read my handwriting, so it'll be okay.
With artificial intelligence, they'll be able to decipher it. I was talking to a young woman earlier today who's busy working on artificial intelligence and neural networks and whatnot. What's your feeling about that?
I
That kind of
understand
brave
that.
word?
I
That brave new
understand it.
world.
I'm afraid of it. It makes me want to just pull the covers over my head. That is because it is so disturbing about what is the real. Not that I think anybody's going to be able to write. I'm not professionally threatened by it, but it makes it so impossible to say what is the real and what do we mean by the real. And if we don't know that, who are we? I feel like for me, it's very frightening about identity. So I had dinner last night with my old roommate from Barnard, who is a lawyer, and she was told me this really scary thing that some young lawyer had gone to a site to find precedents for a case. And this case, there was a precedent for a case and the citations were all, and then somebody said, wait a minute, this case didn't exist. It was completely invented by artificial intelligence.
Wow.
And I thought that is really scary. So not that I understand it, but I'm afraid of it because if we don't know what's real, who are we?
Which kind of says something about your view of humanity and
Yeah.
what's important. I'm going to throw out one more question and then I'm going to open it up to the floor but we had some questions, particularly on the Thomas Mann and Gary, Indiana. You talked about your husband a little bit, and kind of mining that. He talks about Thomas Mann and being brave and where his parents are not, and
Yeah.
they don't stand up against
Yeah.
the discrimination. Why did you, again, you kind of explained that, you're sort of basing it loosely on your husband's background. But at the end, he meets up with Thomas Mann again, and Thomas Mann is kind of rude. And why did you do that? How did you,
I just thought
the young man versus Thomas Mann?
it actually happened not with Thomas Mann, but it happened to my husband that a European teacher that he had really loved he was working as that kind of doorman with the, and it actually happened, the Europeans, as though you're dressing up. And he,
Oh.
and he was that way at all. He actually wanted to volunteer. And he had been so misunderstood, and it was so painful to him. So I just used it.
Okay, it's amazing how how writers can take incidents from their lives or their own personal knowledge and weave, entire narratives around it.
But I do feel strict that if you're, I asked my husband every step of the way. I don't feel that anybody's life story is mine to use. I just don't. And
Yeah.
I would always ask the person, and if they said no, it's no for me. And a lot of writers don't agree with me. But I think of Elizabeth Bishop and Robert Lowell, and she said to Lowell, you didn't have the right to use Elizabeth Hardwick's letters. And he said, well, it's art. And she said, some things are more important than art. And she was a very, very, very great artist. So not everybody feels that way, but I do.
Okay, well, now I'm going to open it up to questions. I know you've all read the book and have, so let's, and if anybody who is online wants to submit a question, you can do that too. But okay, let's start. We'll start in the back and work our way forward. So, okay, so go ahead.
Okay, another commonality that I thought was there is not just the relationship with a mentor or a person that they admired, but young people realizing either who they are or who they're not.
Yes.
And I saw that as a commonality that's only sort of touched on. The other thing I wanted to say is that the story, the third one about the little boy, Billy, I just thought all his conflicts in growing up, it was just described so beautifully, the ambivalences and self-recrimination for things that were normal. It was just a really, really good description. You're getting into the head of.
Well, I was married to that head, so. No, it was fascinating because my husband was so American. And that I thought he was from outer space, and that was always fascinating to me. He had a kind of innocence until the day he died that I never had, and a kind of optimism until the day he died that I never had. And so just but he was quite a decent, intelligent person. And he couldn't wait to get out of the Midwest. And he thought, so when I first met him, I thought that he was a WASP from New England because he was a professor. And he thought I was a Jew who had been brought up on Riverside Drive. But we were very much the other to the other. And so I learned a lot about it.
Okay. All right, Ellis. Okay, and your hands back. Okay, I'm sorry. Betsy? Yeah.
Yes, Betsy. Hi, I'm Betsy Groban. I was a proud English major, huge fan of yours. I didn't know this was required reading, so I haven't read it yet, but I really look forward to it. I had just 3 comments. I'm going to do the guide thing where you just talk, you don't have a question.
Did learn that at Barnard.
Your comments spurred in me. One was traveling around Europe with a Canadian flag on my backpack. Remember that? I think other people maybe were so embarrassed to be American.
Yeah,
And as you pointed out, that has returned.
yeah.
The other 2 things, names that I just wanted to bring in the room as an English major at the time were 2 incredible professors across the street that I took classes with, George Stade and Edward Said. And studying Jane Austen with Edward Said was a unique pleasure that I remember.
I never went across the street.
It was hard. The cross listing was hard.
I never went across the street. Yeah.
And they were big, huge impersonal classes.
Yeah.
Those 2 in particular were so amazing with
Yeah.
18th and 19th century.
Mm.
What I remember about George Stade was that he was the darling of New York Magazine.
He was not great about women. Yeah. Not great about women.
I can imagine, but I wasn't on that level.
But I mean, his criticism was not great about women.
I was really only in the classroom. I
Right.
didn't know where that was.
Softball team.
But I remember, Kenneth Koch was the big poet over
Oh,
there. And they
yes.
were a big New York school, and, they wouldn't let Barnard women read at their readings. And I remember I ran into, I think his name is David Levine, who was the big, poet over there. And it was 25 years later, and he said, "Oh, hi, we were in school together." I said, "Yeah, we were in school together, and you wouldn't let us read with you." And he said, "Do you remember that?" I said, "Of course I remember that. Who would not remember that?" But they were all writing this New York school, very macho poetry. And if you did anything not like that, you were just considered, like this girl that was wearing petticoats. So I had no desire to go over there. I knew that was not going to be good for me.
Jane Austen, that was like a different, I just experienced it as a great professor. I wasn't reading what they were writing. I
Yeah,
was only listening to them teaching. Like, the old masters.
yeah,
If I'd read that other stuff, I probably would.
yeah. Yes.
So I was very interested in your first story because I was married to an Irishman for 22 years. And I was just laughing my whole way through the story. Did you live in Ireland at all, or was that,
Yes,
yes?
Yeah.
Were you involved with an Irishman? Not married?
almost. And then I figured it out and I got on the plane. Yeah. Yeah. I still think, oh my God, I could have lived in Connemara and it would have been beautiful. And no. Go ahead, Ruby.
There. As I told you, I wound up reading these twice because there was a line that jumped out at me and I couldn't remember which damn novella it was. Still can't find it, but the first one with the Irishman, but what bothered me was that both her mother and her father, I felt, especially her mother, kind of abandoned her in a way. They let her marry a man they knew was not going to be appropriate in a relationship that was not going to be okay. They set up the marriage was set up in the home in a very small way for a family in New Canaan that was normally would have done something big. And so clearly they wanted to keep this kind of secret. And so I'm curious about that.
Well, have you ever tried to stop anybody getting married? Particularly, I mean, good luck with that. And also I think they were the kind of parents who were very respectful of boundaries, perhaps excessively so. But I mean, thank God my daughter married somebody I really loved, but I've had the experience of my son being with people, and I knew that if I said don't do it, he would have married her in 5 minutes. So I don't know what you can do if your kid wants to make a marriage that's not good. Probably not a lot.
When I read it, I felt that the father particularly was just under his spell.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Americans loving Europe, which I was one of those. I was German French major and modern European history was my doctorate. So I was completely focused on Europe, as was my aunt. So I was following her. So the father was like just completely
Yeah.
blown away by him and thought it was wonderful.
Yeah.
To go and be a European and live in Europe and marry,
Yeah.
right? Not understanding that there would be a disconnect.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Yes.
But I just kept wishing the mother had tried to do something. I don't know. Taking her aside, whatever. But maybe it's a condition of mothers and daughters because my mother certainly never helped me. So, and it could be from that time. I also want to say I came from the Midwest and
none of my professors did I have a relationship with like you described. However, I also have said many times Barnard saved me.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that way.
Well, I was so lucky. I mean, and I keep the connections. I see in Prescott, as I said, I was, so Jan Thaddeus is, I babysat for her kids, her daughter would babysat for my kids. I've kept those connections. I was really lucky. And then I remember David Robertson had retired to Princeton. I was giving a lecture there and he was in the audience and I dedicated it to him and he blew me a kiss. Now died and gone to
I
heaven.
think
So.
the truth is that somebody recognized your talent very early on, and it was extraordinary. And I think that's probably what happened. While we're all very bright, we're not all extraordinary. Face
Yes,
it.
we are.
My name's Belinda. I'm class of 1973. So I was a German professor. And so I taught regularly courses on the novella. And so your book is called a novella. So in German classes, we talk about the structure. The Germans started the novella.
Yes.
Goethe and all that. And it's got different points that my students have to memorize. And then they have to discuss a novella in terms of the structure according to the Goethe's design. Anyhow, so I was really scared as I read your novella because you have to have eine in sich unerhörte Begebenheit, which it's not a little thing that happens that turns the story. It's absolutely major. So I was sure, and I got more and more nervous, there's going to be a grand murder at the end. And I was incredibly worried. I was nervous reading it. And it never came. And what I thought was marvelous about the novella was that you said in a very low-key, gentle, humorous, subtle way, an actually very extraordinary event in this woman's life where the whole way she led her life, the act of leaving her husband, and then she led this really seemed conventional staid life, and she kept on longing for Richard to come, anchor her as she felt everything she believed in and lived her life as fade in light of her one-year relationship to this guy. And it all turned her upside down and comparing herself to Lynette, and then Lynette had the beautiful voice and then what makes a person's, choice and companion beautiful and desirable. And there were so many elements, and it was so complex and so in a low-key way gripping. Today everyone reads, what is it, Catherine Hoover or whatever it is, and everything is so in her, but it's so in your face and everything, but yours was so marvelously
why
subtle.
I'm not more read, I think,
Well, it's a problem
because the
people don't appreciate understated
Yeah.
great literature.
well, I don't know about great, but
think
I
it's great.
I don't do, I don't do car chases. I don't do serial killers.
Don't do drugs.
No, and
Yeah.
I've kind of, in some ways, yesterday's news because of that, and I've had to come to terms with that and say, okay, I'm gonna write what I'm gonna write, and if the people in this room like it, that's great. And it's been a little bit hard, but I've had to say people who are gonna like it are gonna like it. And that's wonderful. And they're wonderful readers. So I'm lucky, but I'm very much against the grain at the moment. So
Yeah. Who are the authors that are, this is kind of the New York Times book review question, but who are the authors on your night table?
oh, on my night table?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's hard for me to not keep rereading.
Of course.
So I always have Turgenev on my night table.
Oh, beautiful, wonderful style.
I'm reading, I always have Willa Cather on my night table. And one of the things that, if you want to see smoke come out of my ears, it's that Willa Cather is not more appreciated. And that people are still teaching Hemingway in modern literature courses, and they're not teaching Cather. And it was Hemingway and Fitzgerald deliberately tried to marginalize her, and they did it. So Hemingway said, "Oh, Willa Cather, portrait of the artist as a young Swede." And Fitzgerald said, let us avoid the catheterization of American literature. And they marginalized her, and she was marginalized till the 70s when feminists took her over, but she's being marginalized again, I think, because she is subtle and female. Anyway, I'm just reading a book called In Memoriam by an English writer, Alice Wynne. It's about the First World War. And then I have on my bookshelf, but I haven't opened it, Trust, that won the Pulitzer Prize. That seems interesting, but I haven't looked at it yet. But I have to discipline myself not to just read the old favorites over and over again.
What are the old favorites?
Oh, Cather, Proust, Turgenev, the Dubliners, Virginia Woolf. I did my dissertation on Virginia Woolf. So when I have to do alternate side of the street parking and sit in my car for now, I have Virginia Woolf's diaries, and that's what I do for an hour and a half. She's my Bowie Dial. She really is.
Wow.
I think she's the greatest. Yes.
I have to apologize for not reading all the novellas because I was late to getting the schedule. But I love the fact that the first one started with a woman in her 70s. And I'm curious to know if, as you have gotten older, whether you're writing more from the perspective of women.
I am. And that's another reason why I'm not fashionable. Because, yeah. No, but you are my audience. A lot of people don't want to read about a woman who's not sexual. And I mean, we're sexual in different ways, but who is not, out there doing whatever it is that they think women is supposed to be doing. But I'm very interested in writing about how one ages well or badly. I'm very interested in, am I the person I was when I was 20? Yes and no. Those things interest me a lot. But they're not going to put me on the bestseller list.
Are you going to write it?
I have been, yeah.
Yes,
So-
that wasn't the novella we just read, The Liar's Wife.
Yeah,
You're not her.
no.
No.
No, I've never really put myself very much into my books. There's nobody who's like me. I mean, some people are like me, but not really me. Yeah.
One thing that impressed me was that the stylistic changes from one novella to another, and how facile that was. And so I was kind of wondering how intentional all of that was.
Very.
I kind of assume so,
That's
but
hard work, yeah.
it is hard work,
Yeah.
very hard work.
Yeah, you just have to be really listening to every semicolon. And not assuming that it's a one size fits all.
Did you know that when you started?
Yeah.
At each one?
Yeah.
Did you map them out ahead of time,
Mhm.
storyline wise, et cetera, outline them and?
I'm not a hopeful person, so I always have to have an end in sight,
Mhm.
or I wouldn't have the faith that I could actually do it. Sometimes I'm wrong and I feel like I can jettison my plan, but I need to have a plan.
And did anything change from beginning to end as you were working?
The end of the Thomas Mann thing, that came to me quite late. Yeah.
I was impressed by the POVs of how you would go from the 70 and 90, specifically in the Thomas Mann story, it was so infused with the entire narrative of that he was looking back and looking back, and he was now, whether regretful or not regretful of where his life was at 90, he was looking back on this thing that formed, was so big in his life and changed his life so amazingly, right? And also from the first story that we're at 72 and now we're plunged back into when we were a young girl and in love with this crazy man, right? And that it was a wonderful layered presentation of what is happening, but how it's reflective from the POV.
Well, I once met, I had written about and then met Margareta von Trotta, the German film director. And she said, nobody can ever make a movie of your books because all you ever write about is the relationship of the past to the present. So you would always have to have at least two actresses.
Oh.
And so no, it's gonna be too expensive. Nobody would do it.
I don't know, do we have any questions from, okay. Anybody? Yeah. Okay.
I'll just shout it out. You're talking about what's on your nightstand. What do you think of the trend of two authors for one book? It seems to be happening on the Hillary Clinton and Louise Penny, Bill Clinton and somebody
That's
else.
not literature.
Not represent-
I don't care. I mean, they should live and be well. I mean, it has nothing to do with me. It's not literature. It's pop something. It's fun. I mean, if they're enjoying it, God bless them. I mean, but it's not literature. It has nothing to do with what I do. But who would I like to write a book with? They asked me.
Barbara Kingston.
No.
Fan crush.
Oh,
Kate Atkins.
no, probably Helen Mirren.
Everybody's.
Yeah, I'd write a book with Helen Mirren if she wants to. Or maybe Nancy Pelosi. I would do a book with Nancy Pelosi.
Trying to have publicists.
I'm trying to get hold of her. I can't get hold of her, but. anyway. Yeah, Jane.
I was struck by the love expressed in each of the four novellas. And I'm wondering if you just have something that you'd like to say about love.
I guess Dante's right. It's the love is the thing that moves the sun and the stars. And it's what we have. And sometimes it's hard to access. And so what is painful for me is the amount of hate that's let loose in the world today. I just think that Trump was, I don't believe in the devil, but Trump kind of makes me believe in the devil, that he lifted some rock and all this hate that was probably there all the time. We're breathing it in. And love is, it's a lot nicer. It leads to something. Hate is death. Hate kills. And I'm so upset about how angry and hate-filled. I think it's worse than when we were young. I guess we were pretty angry. I mean, during the Vietnam War, we were quite angry, but I don't think we were angry at everybody. It wasn't the first card out of the deck the way it is now. Yeah.
The second novella, you talk of the sibling love is not something that's often written about, and I was very impressed.
I'm an only child.
It's not right with you now.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I was interested in the last story, which made me think of on Beauty and Howard's End. And I don't know if you saw The Inheritance, the play, The Inheritance, which was a 2-part play. It's about the same theme, which is on short acquaintance,
Mhm.
a house is given. And it's a gay couple who give, I don't know if anybody here saw it. It was extraordinary. It was all of, and it's all about love, right? It's
Mm.
all about the establishment of an affinity on a short
Mhm.
acquaintance.
Mhm.
And you do that so extraordinarily well. And it's so tricky because you have to make people believe in the establishment of the affinity on very little evidence, because there isn't a long play. And after all, it's a novella. You don't have a long
Yeah.
time to do it. You have to do it, and you can't do it fake. You can't do, oh, and a lightning bolt came from the sky. You have to do it, right? So you do it over this affinity for this artist. And she's on the rebound from this crazy relation.
Well, I did have a lot of
dysfunctional
fun
relationship.
making fun of academic culture in that. And the party that I did, that was really fun for me.
Making fun of the sex abuse was something that you also got to
Yeah,
take up there.
yeah.
So could you talk more about that
Well,
story
one of
and
the
all
things
those
about
pieces?
an affinity is it's something that happens when you travel. You sometimes meet somebody, you're not going to see them ever again. You meet them in a serendipitous way, and something happens. There's a bond, and you don't forget them, even if you never see them again. And that's kind of happened to me. Yeah, the sexual abuse. I mean, I tried to make him not sympathetic. I didn't think it was okay, but she was so vulnerable. And that, I think, is the real abuse about unequal relationships, is that the abuser goes for someone vulnerable, and the power dynamic is never equal. Yeah, it was hard for me to try to make him at all appealing. I realized I couldn't make him a monster, but I really didn't like him, and I didn't work very hard at making him
Well, what
appealing.
about the other guy, the guy who falls for her and then leaves her the house? How?
Well, he wasn't in love with her. He just saw that she was the real thing. And that's a different kind of love. And there was no abuse involved at all, I think, just the opposite. But,
Wonderful story.
thank you.
I thought you had a great time writing it.
I did. I did. I was.
That one they could make a film of.
Oh,
That's what I'm saying. Why doesn't somebody make a movie out of that? I mean, it's even a happy ending, which I'm not famous for, but yeah, you tell somebody.
Have you ever worked in stage or, screenwriting or anything
No,
like that?
no.
So you'd have to find
I once tried to write a screenplay and somebody said, this were a movie, it would be somebody standing still talking for 2 hours. Movies have to move. I said, oh,
back to the car chases.
yeah,
Exactly right.
but that was guys. It never would have been 2 women talking.
Well,
That's okay.
Yes.
Just wondering if you were to recommend a new author that you think is up and coming that we might want to.
Claire Keegan, Irish writer. Claire Keegan. She, Foster, and their last book was Small Things Like These. She's Irish. It's fantastic. And they made a film out of Foster. It was very, very beautiful. She's just wonderful. I really, really recommend her. Yeah, she's really great. Yes.
I was late. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I was sitting there by myself out at lunch going, come on, it's my 50th reunion.
where is everybody? I was trolling from table to table and looking like, 68. It was quite pathetic, actually.
Something I
My
would have done.
husband, I was in tears and then Crystal she probably texted me and said, this is where we are. So, but just as when I was in Barnard, I always have something to say, even if I didn't read the book, show up to class. I actually do, so in general, first of all, you're an incredibly skilled writer. And my husband, who doesn't read that many women, loves your writing.
Oh, my God.
Loves your writing and loves the Jewish Catholic guilt, like I'm sure that's, people say that to you all the time, because it is a kind of a predominant.
Well, I have a double whammy.
Exactly, a double dose of guilt.
Yes.
I remember reading that, but now that I've entertained you or tried to, in any case, what do you think, the Booker Prize, all the very large fiction awards, if you look at the last 20 years of those awards, of the top 5, what do you think the trends are?
I
And what do
can't
you-
think
what do you-
about it. It's bad for my mental health to think about it. I just do not allow myself to think about it because it distracts me. It makes me think about things that have nothing to do with what I need to do. It could potentially make me feel resentful. All those things that are just no good and a waste of my time and energy. And I just make it a point of not
Well, it's
looking
like
and thinking about it.
actors who say they don't see their films. I mean, there's a little bit of that in there, I think, but if I may, in terms of what I see as a pretty voracious reader is how hard I try to stay connected to what's being written now and how disconnected I feel. It's just, and you see things and you're like, I know, just like the movie Everything Everywhere, whatever. Like, you know, I hate it. Dude, what's happening? Lost? Like, I don't know.
What was that? I don't know. I guess that there's something wrong with us, though. I mean, that's what I feel. It's not our time. It's not, it's not for us. I just think about when my mother heard Bob Dylan, she thought it was caterwauling. So maybe we're wrong. I think it's very important for me to say, not my world, not my time. Is it good for me to think about that? Or is it bad for me to think about that?
But again, as a reader, like I want there to be something in that list
Yeah.
that resonates, something that, oh yeah, people are still writing like this. They're still looking at the basics of humanity to expound on and get people closer to. There are those young writers, but you really have to search them out,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there is a winnowing that occurs through history. I mean,
Yeah.
when Shakespeare was writing, he was just one of a bunch of playwrights and, writing for the masses. I mean, thank you, Professor Patterson. I mean, to this day, I love Shakespeare. But there were other people writing who, at the time who, were also, it was the popular entertainment and we don't read them. We don't know. So, or going to the Museum of Modern Art, how much of that stuff is going to, they have a real tough time picking out what's going to last, what the good stuff is. For every Dickens, there are 20 others and they're on the bestseller list for a while, but history has a way of dropping some of the garbage out.
Maybe.
We
We don't know.
We hope that it seems to work that way anyway. I mean,
But when you think of Bach not being played for so long, and then Mendelssohn sort of rediscovers him.
Yeah.
And then Pablo Casals has to rediscover him again.
at least they get rediscovered.
Yeah, but how many Bachs are there that got lost?
Process. Can you explain your writing process? How many hours a day do you write? Do you write every day? Is there a special time of day that you like to write? What do you do?
It's changed as I've aged. So I had a lot more energy than I used to have. And that's something that I have to come to terms with. I can't believe what I did when I had little kids. I was teaching and writing. I do not know how I did it. I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning when I had little kids and I wrote for 2 hours before everybody woke up. And, you know, my teaching, I would say, well, there are some days that I teach, I still write every day. I had a lot more energy than I used to have. I could do 6, 7 hours at a stretch. Now 2 is about what I can do, and then nap time. But I do it every day.
Do you use a computer or do you
No.
write by hand?
I write by hand.
Ah, does it, how does that, do you think that makes a difference in the
I
way
do.
people?
It slows me down and it connects me to my body. It's like certain words take longer. And so there's a physicality to the words. And I can hear the rhythm more as I'm writing it. And if I have to cross it out, I see what I've crossed out and I see the thing that was there before, and the cross out looks really dramatic. Whereas if you just erase it, it's like it never was. Yes.
You're a professor. Do you espouse like do this, or is it okay if your young writers use computers?
Oh, they can do whatever they want. I don't.
I mean, but you're just saying.
I say this is what I do. It works for me.
Yeah.
Think about it. But you know, I mean, I'm not teaching now for 3 years, but I try to say it's not my world. What can I give them that is of help to them? What could I say that has absolutely no use for them? And it's one of the reasons I retired. I thought a lot of the things that they need to do and know, I don't know. And they need somebody to tell them, and it's not me.
Could you elaborate on that? Like, what is it? Do you know what you didn't know? What was missing?
You know, I could never put any kind of technology into like a character or fiction. I can't do dystopia, which is very fashionable now. I can't do violence. There's a lot of stuff that is in the air and that they could possibly do well that I couldn't teach them. And there's a lot of stuff that I'm uncomfortable with that they're not uncomfortable with. And there's no reason for them to be uncomfortable with what makes me uncomfortable, but it still makes me uncomfortable. So certain kinds of sexuality, certain kind of like very sadomasochistic sexuality, I'm just extremely uncomfortable with it. Doesn't mean anything to them. It's like vanilla to them. You know, kind of making characters talk to each other on emails or Twitters. I couldn't do that. I wouldn't know how to judge whether it was good or not, but it's their world. And so it's somebody else's turn to tell them. And I never wanted to be in an adversarial relationship with my students. Yeah. Yeah, luckily I have enough students who I still keep in touch with. I don't miss feeling, again, like I have to be shot out of a cannon 4 times a week and say something. I don't miss that pressure.
Oh my goodness.
So are you writing more now that you're teaching?
No,
You're not.
no. I'm not writing more than when I had children. And I thought I would.
I think like we have so much responsibility in our life. We compartmentalize the day.
Yeah.
We're so much more efficient than we
Yes,
have. just-
absolutely. I used to, when my kids were little, and I would have a babysitter from 9 to 1. And if I was writing War and Peace at 1:05, it was over. So I had to do everything in those 4 hours. I sat down and it was showtime. Now I'm like. Computer solitaire. I remember my husband came in one time, he said, "What are you doing?" And he caught me playing computer solitaire and he was just appalled. And I confess, I play more computer solitaire than I wish I did.
Those algorithms, it's the algorithms, they're designed to make you, Candy Crushes.
Oh, no, I just do, I do the spelling bee every day, the
Yes.
and I do Wordle.
Yes.
And then I do a little computer, and then I say, okay, guys.
This is maybe an oddball question, but I just happened to read a couple of things recently that were written during the pandemic. Some of these are established writers. And it's very interesting to see what people are making of it in the middle. There's a lot of rich literary material in it. And I just wonder, sort of, what are your thoughts and what do you think is novelistic about our pandemic experience?
Oh, I think but you know what's interesting? Nobody wants to publish it.
Oh, really?
Gary Steingart's one book, it's actually
Maybe it's just.
a bunch of people in the Hudson, with a house in Hudson
Yeah.
Valley.
Oh,
Yeah.
But I know, I have friends that have wanted to write about the pandemic and publishers have said, people don't want to think about it anymore.
That won't last forever.
I don't know. I mean, when you think about, really not a huge amount was written about 9/11, considering.
Yeah, the site can only handle so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, has anybody else experienced something, a phenomena, I think, not just our latest professor in the English department, which I'm in creative writing, which I'm very excited about, but
Jim Lahiri.
yes.
Yeah.
But I have somehow stumbled across a whole treasure trove of stories and novels on American Indian life. And it's been fascinating. And it's getting published, is, I think, the important thing.
Mhm.
And some of these are so beautifully written. It's just amazing to me. And if you wanted me to roll off an author's name, I couldn't, to be perfectly honest, but I could, it's on my Kindle and I can find it. But to me, this is like, it's like a whole ethnicity that's been ignored
Yeah.
for a long time.
There are many. I'm sorry, what?
I'm just saying Louise Erdrich has been.
Yes.
Yes, yeah,
Tony Oranges.
yeah. Yeah, she's wonderful.
Going to throw out, I know we've been talking a lot about women authors and women writers, and I remember being at Spectator, and I remember the controversy over the idea of coeducation, of Columbia going co-ed, and what a controversial stance it was. And Barnard took a stance, no, we were going to keep our identity. We were going to stay a women's school. Meanwhile, Vassar became, when and there are still other women colleges, the Seven Sisters, Mount Holyoke,
Bryn Mawr.
although they do, in some cases, they're part of a consortium of,
Yeah.
the Massachusetts. But what's your feeling about Barnard and what the importance of a women's college? I mean, you, Rivian, I mean, what would Barnard be Barnard if it admitted men?
No,
I mean,
no.
what?
It's very hard for me to define. There's something.
Yeah.
Women, even now, speak differently if there are only women in the room.
Correct.
I have had classes that have had 2 men in it, and they take up a disproportionate amount of airtime. Still. I think that if the default setting is female, a lot of things just become easier and don't have to be struggled over and don't have to be won.
Like what? I mean, it's funny, I was sitting next to a couple last night. We started talking to, and she had taught at Columbia. She's 20 years younger than we are. And that conversation came up of why is Barnard still an all-women institution, whatever. And we were trying to voice, the same things. And so that was one of my reasons. And then the husband said, like, what? Like,
QED.
what would you not, how is the conversation different?
Okay, so
I mean, I have an answer, but it's
in
my
a
answer.
writing class, for example,
Mhm.
I think women feel freer to talk about things like eating disorders, sexual abuse, the number of women who have been abused by one person or another. It's huge, and you don't have to defend it. Like a guy would be saying, "Whoa, you giving the guy's point of view? Maybe she asked for it." You wouldn't have to spend 5 minutes talking about that.
I mean, I agree with what you're saying. I think everybody has.
But I'll
everybody
give
can
you
answer the
a
question
different
differently.
example. My daughter went to Columbia because she thought my footprints were all over Barnard, and she took most of her classes at Barnard. And she wanted to be pre-med. And pre-med at Columbia was so hideous. She said, so the first day she signed up for an interview, and some big guy knocked a slight Asian woman off the line to take her place to get to an internship. And she said, the way pre-med was at Columbia was so hideous that she didn't become pre-med. And had she taken her science and pre-med courses at Barnard, it would have been different. And she then, she did the extra courses and went to medical school. But she did not, the courses that mattered to her, she took at Barnard. And I think just, if you're going to do pre-law, what subjects get discussed? And what subjects do you have to fight to get discussed? It's just the amount of time that you have to waste fighting for what is just to hand in a normal woman's.
I mean, I think that education at a women's school is really learning to understand your voice and the voice of others, and understanding your voice for women. I think as teenagers, as young adults, young women, it's so important to share your experiences. And that really is not the case in a co-educational environment. And for me, Barnard saved me because I came from a very large public high school, and your voice was very limited there. And I never knew that I could be in a small group, in a small class, speak out and be encouraged by female and male professors. I'll never forget Annette Baxter. I'll never forget, being in Professor McKay's class and having him say to me, hey, you didn't do a good job in this, but where did you get that idea? Where did you find that fact? How did you do this? I've never seen it. And that said to me, I could do anything.
Yeah.
And so being in a woman's college and having that small environment with other women and people willing to listen to your voice and help it grow, I think was critical.
Well, and also even now, young women would say things and they'd talk into their, and so many young women say, this is probably stupid, and I'd say, do not do that. And I used to say to them, you are talking into your collar. Across the street, men are saying things of immense stupidity at the top of their voices. Do not do that. And I still think women have to be, helped and trained to do that, even now.
I also think that one of the reasons women's college is important is because I grew up in the South, and the way
let's see what the little lady has
Yeah.
to say.
Wow.
And even at women's colleges down there, there was an assumption that men could get away with that kind of talk. And they still do.
Yeah.
It's locker room talk. My dad used to talk about my brother's stable of fillies. And this was like 5 years ago. So it's a different world down there that we have it up here.
You can watch the way, just to add to that, you can watch the way women political candidates are treated versus men. Whether it's Hillary Clinton, whether it's Nikki Haley, stupid remarks.
Right.
We've got a lot of courage here.
Right, right.
Oh, that's-
Yeah, just one more thing and I'll shut up. No, I won't. Hey, I don't know how to shut up, but the discussion I was having with this couple, again, about the same topic next to me, and she taught at Columbia. And she was saying what we're saying now about feeling the boldness to be able to speak, to be heard, to be encouraged. I mean, I grew up in a family with 2 girls. My dad was a great feminist. He was a member of NOW in the first grouping. I never had a nanosecond, a feeling that I wasn't as good as the boys intellectually, ever. Or as you can see, I'm outgoing, raising my hand and getting in there for the discussion and debating and all of that. And for me, because that hurdle had already been jumped once I got to Barnard, for me, and it brings tears to my eyes, and part of it was the times, but there was such a shared chord sense of spirit and power. I mean, we knew we were powerful women. We'd sit in a class, any class, and you'd look around and you'd go, we're here for a reason. We're here because we wanted to be with other women. The guys are across the street, they can wait till later or whatever, whatever your proclivity might be. But as we were an incredible force, and I have felt that force in my life to this day. I am proud that I went to Barnard. I love telling people I went to Barnard. I love meeting people traveling the world who went to Barnard. Is there anything more fun? You go to Paris and the woman sitting next to you in the bar went to Barnard. There's because you have a shared conversation, a shared background, regardless of the year they graduated. And there's something that Barnard does to you that gives you a very gentle but firm kick in the butt about, get out there in the world and be something.
Well, I'll tell you my first day in graduate school, which was my first day of coeducation, and I was taken on by a very well-known poet to do an independent study, W.D. Snodgrass. And the first day of graduate school, he said, "You know what women poets are like?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, in the winter, a male bear and a female bear go into a cave. And the male bear shoves a pine cone up the female bear's ass because he doesn't want her to shit during the winter. And in the spring, he pulls the pine cone out of her ass and she shits all over the walls of the cave. That's what women poets are like." That was my first day of graduate school. No, I was.
I visited from here to go to the history department at Columbia Graduate School, me and a whole bunch of guys come too. And it was a completely different experience than being in the Barnard classes, even though I took a lot at Columbia too. It was just so different. I was in economic history, not women's history, but every time there was a question in the room about women's history, the entire group looked at me and said, "What do you think?" I said, "I don't know, I just do numbers." Right? But that was what it was like, and it was awful, awful. And I had a mentor, Fitz Stern.
Oh
my goodness, he was a wonderful.
Oh, it was
guy.
wonderful.
But there was a woman, you know this story, Mara. I forget her name now, but she was 2 years ahead of me or 3 years ahead of me and had been working with Fritz too. And she'd gone on to teach at Harvard. And because I got into the program through Fritz, I met her and we corresponded. She had a hellish year. She was teaching at Harvard. No one would talk to her. The only person, she couldn't go to any of the guys' clubs or anything because she wasn't allowed in. The only person who would have a conversation with her was the one Black teacher who was teaching Black studies. So the entire campus thought they were having an affair when they weren't, right? And finally, after 1 year, she left. We were corresponding, she told me. 5 days later, true story, Fritz runs in, I'm doing some work for him. I have fabulous news for you, Anne. What? You're going to Harvard. And I said, no, I'm not. And I did not go. Instead, I went off and sang in the Folks Opera in Vienna. But that was the way it was. And it was just awful for women in the field.
And it's much better now, but it's still, I still think it's, women still want to talk into their collars. And you have to. And also I say to them, when somebody says your name, don't say, my name is Sarah. Everybody's name is Sarah. Say, my name is Sarah Goldfarb. You know, do it, own your adulthood. And women have to be trained not to be girly. Even now. And
That's very sad.
yeah.
Margaret, you had something you can say?
I said nothing during these discussions the last few days, for whatever that's worth. I teach at LIU Post, Long Island University Post, which is part of Long Island University. It's a small liberal arts school. And I've been teaching there for 46 years. And we have relatively small classes, 20, 30 students in the class, something like that. And I tell the students at the beginning of the semester, and we have males and females. I tell them at the beginning of the semester, they should, if they don't understand something that I say, or that's something that one of their fellow students says, that they should say, I don't understand what you say, or ask the question that's in your mind. And I said to them, don't worry about whether it's a stupid question or it's not a stupid question, because there's no such thing as a stupid question. And then I go on and I say, there may be questions that are obnoxious or irritable, but there's no such thing as a stupid question. And part of the reason I say that is because I want them to be aware that they can ask questions in our class and learn something. And they should recognize that that's good. Also, the other reason is because my father, who's was a chemical engineer, told me he didn't like the word stupid. And so I didn't get into a big philosophical discussion with him, but I understood what he was saying. So I want people in my class to say what they think that they should say, but always say it politely. Don't be obnoxious. Be obnoxious about it, but be politely. No foul language in the classroom. So I could go on and on and on and on. 46 years is a long time to teach. And so my students really feel. So, but in any case, I'm going to stop here and say I appreciated having the education at Barnard. My mother grew up during the Depression, wanted to go away for college, but at the time their parents couldn't afford it. And so she didn't go away to college. When it was my turn to, well, now I'm saying my turn to go away to college. I'm sorry, can you hear me now? You may not want to hear what I have to say. When my mother grew up during the Depression, there wasn't enough money for her to go away to school. She did beautifully. She went to Hunter College, but it was Hunter College, which was a very good school at the time, still is a very good school. And somebody told my mother that at the time that Hunter College was harder than was Barnard at the time. And she was probably true. I'm almost done. Go ahead. You can stop now. That's the other thing. I stop.
But did you find differences in your classroom between the boys and the girls and how they responded to you and work?
I beat them all up. Yes, sometimes they responded differently.
But I think, I don't, let's see if there are any other final questions or anything. I have one. One back. Okay.
I just wanted to ask a question of everybody else, really. This is our 50th reading. It's 50 years after what we experienced. And at that time, we all thought this was a new woman's world. And we had so many opportunities that people didn't have in the past.
The saddest thing I heard today from Mary Gordon is that although you hadn't taught in 3 years, 3 years ago at least, you were still seeing that same male-female dynamic that makes it difficult for women to learn it well and to feel empowered in an environment of men. Now we were of a generation, we experienced discrimination or whatever, whatever kind of treatment during our various types of careers, but has it changed over 50 years?
course,
Or is it
of
always
course.
going to be like
Of
this?
course, but you
Will
have
it
to
take
say
100?
it's an enormous systemic change, epistemic change. We have to say, so my best friend from Barnard went to medical school in 1972. And most of the class was male. One of her friends got pregnant and they suggested that she see a psychiatrist. When my daughter was in medical school, they had lactation rooms so things have changed. Things have changed enormously. We have to say that it is the most dramatic challenge to humanity that has ever happened, to say that males and females are equal. It's more dramatic than race. It's more dramatic than religion. We have to be patient. It has changed, but we also have to be vigilant and not be tempted by some fantasy that the past was better and easier. Which is what the right wing wants to say, life was great in the 50s. Why can't we go back to that? That's very tempting for some people because life is very hard now. Everything's up for grabs. Nothing is certain. There's not a lot to hold on to. I feel sorry for the species. I feel that we're a very beleaguered species right now. But of course things have changed. But we have to be vigilant and compassionate, I guess. I can't be compassionate to Donald Trump, but what we wanted is the greatest change in the history of the species. So of course it's going to take time, and we just mustn't get discouraged. And we have to encourage each other. We'll say, like, God, we're terrific. Look at what was told to us, that we could be, and look at what we've become. I mean, we're great. And to tell that to our daughters, and that it's going to be hard, but it's better now. It really is better now.
Jessica?
200 years, we can all go to a men's co-ed school.
That's fine. Okay, you didn't have anything to say? Well, I think I want to thank Professor Dr. Gordon, writer Mary Gordon.
And many other than those. My life is not easy.
Go read those.
I did. I want.